This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Good evening and welcome to the Late Tuesday Night Show. I'm Natalie Maher, and you can join me for the next hour where I will discuss gifted students and mental health. Tonight I'll be joined by Silvia Garrido Soriano.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teach Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Natalie Maher, and I'll be here 9 till 10 p.m. alternate Tuesdays on the Late Show. I hope to cover a variety of different topics on the show, but first let me introduce myself. I'm a drama specialist and director of drama. I have 20 years of teaching experience in various secondary settings in Hertfordshire, Essex and London. Alongside teaching and examining, I have a theatre review podcast called Theatre Audience Podcast. And tonight's topic is gifted students, and we'll be chatting about mental health and well-being. Tonight, I'll be joined by Silvia Garrido Soriano. She's worked in education for over 20 years. She's published in the US and has been a keynote speaker at conferences. Alongside all of this, she also runs regular sound baths to support mental health amongst other therapies. So I'm thrilled to be joined by Silvia this evening. Are you in the studio with me?
Oh, hello, Natalie. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, thanks so much for coming on the show. And it's so lovely to have the opportunity to have a catch up with you. It's quite a long time ago now that we met each other. Do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about how we met and what it was that we were working on?
Yeah, it's not a love story, that's for sure. So, I think it was probably about 10 years ago, Natalie. I'm not completely sure, but at that point, I was the UK National Director for FPS, which is Future Problem Solving. I think it's a great program. Originates from the States in the 70s by the father of creativity, Paul Torrance. And I was running it across the UK. You came to our school with your students, and ever since we've just been in touch. So it's wonderful to be able to talk to you tonight about this fascinating topic, really.
Exactly. Yeah. So wonderful to be able to have a chance to talk to you. And obviously working with gifted students is something that is dear to your heart and something that you're incredibly experienced in. Could we maybe for our listeners just define the difference between sort of gifted versus more able, high achievers?
Sure. I think obviously when we work in competitive secondary settings, we tend to be quite selective, and there is perhaps the misconception that all our students are gifted. I would like to obviously clarify different authors, different sources, they may vary a little bit on the percentage, but it's understood that 1 to 3% of our population is gifted, which is not only based on an IQ superior to 130, but it also involves creativity, problem solving, cognitive ability. So again, we have high achievers, so they are our pupils who actually want to learn, they spend time learning, they are bright, they ask questions, but they learn step by step. They get to the questions and to the answers by practicing, by spending time. Of course, they are able. I mean, if we go back to the bell curve and we look at the different deviations, if we understand that 100 would be the average, 15 at either side of the average would be about 70% of the population. Once we go beyond the 115, that's more able. Well, actually, it's not more able. That we shouldn't be using anymore. They are high achievers, and above 130 is what we could call gifted students. Now, obviously, here in the UK, the terminology has changed. We used to have gifted and talented, then they were more able. Now we are talking about high intellectual abilities or high learning potential. So that's really, I mean, obviously, I could go on and on for a long time, but understanding that gifted students, they perhaps don't ask questions. They are more about abstract ideas and concepts and theories. They don't need the step-by-step learning. They jump from 2 to 10. And obviously, when they are in the classroom, we need to cater for their needs. And if we don't stretch and challenge them enough, we do tend to find difficulties. So either the 10 top percent or the bottom 10% of our students do require that strong differentiation, and not because they are gifted. The myth of the misconception is that well, they are very able, they are gifted, they don't need as much support, and actually that's wrong, really, to believe in that way. Obviously, when it comes to gifted students, we understand gifted and talented. So a gifted child, pupil, student would be would be very good across all subjects. We understand is they are on this 97th percentile, whereas talented, they would have a single talent or maybe a couple of several domains, as could be an academic or artistic, or a single domain, which could be a creative, mathematical, logical, or a sport. So that's how we see our students and the different ability in schools, really.
Yeah, really, really interesting. I mean, so this identifying of a gifted child is, I guess it's different in every setting. I mean, obviously we're talking more from a secondary school perspective. But I guess within each setting, everyone's got their own policies and guidelines with regards to where, where they identify who is gifted within a school. Would you say that's accurate?
I think obviously over the years there have been a few misconceptions. For example, Renzulli's three-ring conception of giftedness, where he's talking about gifted behavior is when we find an above average ability with the creativity and the task commitment. And for a long time, incorrectly, this was a sort of a way of identifying gifted students. Unfortunately, the above average ability, we are talking about 15 to 20% of the population. So that would be our high achievers, and they could be working really hard. That would be gifted behavior, but not necessarily a way of identifying our pupils. It's really important to follow EP reports, to follow all the screening. However, not all screenings are actually accurate, because if we encounter pupils who are twice exceptional, or well, now in the UK we call them DME, dual and multiple exceptionalities. These pupils, they might have dyslexia, or they might have dyspraxia. They might have it's a comorbidity alongside giftedness. So it's often difficult to ascertain their intellectual ability. And for that reason, in so many occasions, EPs cannot diagnose or just find those pupils who have that potential and that ability. So it gets a little bit complicated when it's only based on a paper on a test without taking into consideration a little bit more about the student, because it's important to also ascertain information from tutors, from peers, from family. Communication is really important. We don't see everything in schools, and it's important to really ascertain as much information as possible. So I think that's why finding out at times who those gifted students are, and how to perhaps put it in paper. I mean, I think at the moment is I'm a true believer that labeling for the sake of labeling, it's pointless. So we should be labeling if we're going to support our students. So if we're going to highlight that one of our pupils is gifted, then we need to take into consideration their likes and dislikes and the interest and mainly the passions, because that's what's going to help our students to really develop and be excited about researching a topic of interest, because really we're aiming to get these pupils to be independent learners. And sometimes in the classroom they might get bored, they might misbehave as well, and it's difficult at times for for classroom teachers to be able to uh, work out with the high achievers, with those who are less able and they need more support, with the vast cohort, the majority in between. So it is a little bit of a juggling act, and it is, I believe it's important to differentiate in the classrooms, but as well for those gifted students to perhaps have learning contracts, so the student understands what is core and what they need to complete during the lesson. But once they have finished, and usually it's quite fast, then they can move on to their own project, they can move on to that learning contract that has been pre-agreed with the teacher. So,
That's really, really interesting what you say about the learning contracts. I recall a couple of schools ago, when I was gifted and talented coordinator, which is when I met you, and I remember doing a little focus group, sitting down with a group of students across different year groups, and I remember a key thing coming up was where students said, I don't want to finish the tasks early because all I get then is an extension task. So
absolutely.
I'd rather slowly work through and finish with everyone else,
Mm,
because the extension tasks that they were being given, and this is not, in every classroom, were it was just extra work. It wasn't a step up, or like up the ladder of another level of challenge. It was just more of the same.
uh,
And I remember it opened up a whole can of worms, and then there was a massive tangent, and then we looked into that and worked out how we could change things, um, because and we're talking over 10 years ago. Differentiation has really come on a long way. um, Teachers, it was just like an extra worksheet, or hand you this or whatever, just to keep you quiet because you're done, and they can then go and support the middle or the lower end of the classroom. So are you able to tell me a little bit more about these
yeah,
learning contracts?
absolutely. I think you've really highlighted really interesting points there, because when I speak to teachers, that's what I say to them. If a student has proven they can do sums, don't give them another worksheet of sums. Give them subtractions, or tell them, give them a little challenge. because again, and I think boredom is key. If they get bored, they're going to misbehave, then they get in trouble, then we are actually excluding them. And it's a little vicious circle. And the only thing I truly believe communication, it comes in all forms and shapes. So obviously primary school, probably there is more frustration, they'll bite, they'll misbehave in a different way. And later on I'll speak to you about overacceptabilities. But I just think when it comes to even identifying a child from the teacher's perspective, so many times, I mean, I've worked in the Middle East, I continue to contribute to summer camps for the gifted in Spain in the summer, and I'm quite still connected to the US with future problem solving. And doesn't matter where I travel or where I go, there is always the same sort of big question mark from teachers. What can we do to help? But again, is those traits that so many teachers, they think, oh, well, he's misbehaved, he's underachieving, he's not completing tasks. So the answer is, what are we actually doing when you have this curious pupil, when they actually, you can perhaps have little, almost like do a little bit of Sherlock Holmes here, where you think, okay, fine, are they curious? Do they take their own approach to assignments? Do they have large vocabulary, for example? Do they prefer to have adult conversations? Sometimes um, pupils do not really connect with the same year group, with their peers. So they have their own original ideas. They're probably, they're obviously more cognitively advanced, and they are able to self-teach. So that's what I think, that when we provide them with these contracts, at first, when I spoke to teachers, they were, obviously the first thing is, we haven't got enough time, we already have enough paperwork, we have to already differentiate for the less able. So I think teachers have enough on their plate, so they felt almost like it was going to be burdening them with these contracts. I just think is at the beginning of each unit or each term or each month, or however you decide to really work around these, it's a matter of teacher and student, they sit together, we're going to be looking at this topic, and the core material you need to really follow. So they do draw, I mean, it could be just an A4 document, doesn't need to be anything fancy, just one page, as in, these are the topics you need to complete, these exercises from these pages or these topics or these areas. And once this is completed during the lesson, the student proposes those areas of interest within the subject that he would like to research, he or she would like to research. And then at that point is when we're actually letting them research, find their little niche, find the information that they're interested about. They are independent learners, and most importantly, they are motivated and they are excited to be in that lesson, rather than finishing very quickly and just messing about and getting into trouble. And it's a vicious circle either way, so either spirals up or spirals down, really.
That's really interesting about the fact that they can, finish quickly and then mess about behavior wise. That can cause issues in the classroom, especially as those students may be the students that people look up to, as students who are brighter and who should be behaving, etc. So that's really interesting. What else can teachers do then to support these gifted students in class? I mean, obviously it varies from subject to subject. I think obviously your specialism is modern languages. So what might be an example from your teaching?
Yeah, well, I think it doesn't matter the subject that you teach. I think I'm 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 always really focused on the social emotional um, development, and I think for this cohort to be praised is very important. We obviously know that they have that ability and they can succeed, but to be able to thrive in a safe environment is when they can feel themselves and there is no judgment. So I think praise and attention to them is as important as to those less able, because at times they feel a little bit isolated, or perhaps even just we in class may use them as little teachers. Or you go and help someone, or you pair them up, and I think it's quite exciting for them at some point to be able to support and help peers, but they shouldn't be coming to school to just support peers. And I think that's a little danger there in the classroom. Obviously, creativity and problem solving in any area is just getting that curiosity, open-ended questions where they can explore and develop. That's another way we could support them. Of course, collaborative tasks, and in order to get those key skills such as convergent and divergent thinking, reasoning, time management, organization. Probably all these words sound familiar to you about future problem solving, Natalie. I just think that all the acquisition of soft skills from an early age are fundamental tools, because they need them in their adult life. And I think obviously there is a lot of talk about our educational system, but it's not only here, I think it's globally, where we should be teaching to pass an exam. We need to provide them with all those soft skills, with those tools for them to be in society when they're adults. So I think teachers, the idea of being the fountain of knowledge that was 50 years ago is obsolete. I think teachers, we should be facilitators. We really need to guide them. We need to give them support with their learning. And again, if they get bored, that's going to have an impact on their motivation and self-esteem. I know there has been quite a lot of controversy about Gardner's multiple intelligence over the years, but I still feel that if we know our students and the way they best learn, that's going to already be a good way ahead. Because if we know that we have visual learners and we just talk and they get really bored, then we switch off. All of us would. But if it's a bit multisensory, we are trying to just get their attention, but as well get them working rather than just sitting and listening. It needs to be multisensory and interactive environment. So I think it doesn't matter what subject you teach, is about being a little bit creative and maybe a little bit relaxed. Sometimes magic happens when we don't literally write down in our lesson plans minute by minute what happens. Sometimes an open question can lead to some magic, really.
And that's so true. I mean, that's what education's all about, isn't it? It's about getting that inquisitiveness out of the students. And my best lessons are always the ones where I go off plan, because they've surprised me in some way, or they've asked me a question that I am human and can't answer, and then we'll go off on a research tangent to find out how that works or why we should do that. And that's what it's all about. And it's like you say, it's linked to that whole motivation and not having them bored. I mean, that's the worst possible thing, where you have a student who is, gifted, very able, and they're bored because they're not getting that level of stretch and challenge that they need, and then they coast.
Absolutely. And I just think as well, we all try to support this cohort, but and we feel perhaps that running a little club at lunchtime will do. We tick a box. Yeah, well, we see them, we do some activities, and that's it. Even some schools, they might remove them from lessons to follow a different program or to follow different challenges. But I truly believe that the more we get them out of lessons, the more we are excluding them, because we are not providing that support in lessons. And whilst these different groups, they are supported at a different time in a different place, we actually not doing it right. I know it's really difficult. I'm a school teacher. I'm in the classroom. Some days I feel like I'm a magician trying to, support and challenge, and and I say to my students, look, today we cannot be playing maracas. We really need to focus on what we are doing. It's a little bit more boring, but we really need to get on with things. So it is difficult, especially when we have exams, especially when we have a syllabus to follow. But I think the most important thing, and for me, would be to provide that level of differentiation in class. I truly believe that whilst we walk into a classroom and we see every child doing the same exercise on the same page, we are not really providing the support they need, because everybody works at their own pace, and some of our students may need to go over a few more repetitions and they'll need more consolidation. But again, on the other end, we need that stretch and challenge. We need to really support um, our more able students. And I believe that a multi-level teaching would be perhaps the best way of approaching lessons. But again, I think all these new innovative techniques and trying to learn new ways can be a little bit daunting at times. So we understand as well what teachers have to go through on a day-to-day basis. So
Oh,
it is
absolutely.
difficult.
Absolutely. And like you say, it's the magician. I often feel like I'm a clown, juggling, just spinning those plates constantly because, you're thinking I need to assess them, but also I want to challenge them. I want to stretch them. I need to, new concepts. We need to now apply this. And obviously the way in which we assess in schools, there's been a lot of conversation about this, particularly on Teachers Talk Radio. A lot of the shows that I've been listening to, there's been quite a lot of discussion about assessment and syllabus and skill sets. And in today's society, are we preparing students best for their their work in the real world? There's jobs out there that never even existed 10 years ago, particularly in tech, and how are we stretching and challenging them and preparing them for the future? And there's been some, really, really interesting discussions about that. Obviously, I don't want to go off into a tangent now, but just to come back to a point that you made about, where you may have a more able, a gifted student, and they'll be working another student in class. Let's just talk about how we choose sometimes to pair up the students with regards to differentiation, because like you said about the boredom or the support, again, what came out of a discussion years ago that I had with them, with these gifted students and also with talented students. I was working on the other side of things as well with regards to practical subjects, arts, creative, PE. These students are not a teaching assistant. They're not there to monitor the behaviour of other students in class, or at times it's lovely that they're there to support a less able student and help them through. But if they get sat next to that same student and it's an expectation that they should be helping that student every lesson, a resentment can rise up there. So how should we think about how we group students in class, or where we seat them?
Sure. I really think it's important to have like almost like a carousel of activities, and I really get quite excited when we are doing things in the classroom and students can move. This sitting and not moving, it can be difficult, especially if we are hypermobility, even if we have different over activities in class. And I think how we pair them, I wouldn't say we pair more able with less able. At times, pairing the very able together can be really rewarding for them, because they're actually just challenging each other. And obviously we see certain traits amongst these cohorts. So recurring themes would be the universe, would be a more abstract subjects, life and death, existential questions, and they get quite excited to find someone with their own interest to the same deep level of interest, and it's like almost their own little niche. So I think it's important for them to be part of something, to feel they belong, and I just feel that at times it's nice for them to be part of a mix group where everybody brings something to the table, because they are not necessarily always right. They do as well make mistakes, and they're always, sometimes they can be even overconfident. But again, we cannot generalize, because we also find gifted students who are school refusals, who are having mental health problems, and who are really not coping at school. So there is a lot of myth there. But I really think, depending on the activity, the important thing is that they are collaborative, they are interactive, they are hearing what others say, and they can work together and build little by little those soft skills that is going to help them later on in life.
Absolutely. And we'll come back to the challenges of being gifted in a moment. I'm just going to take a second to remind our listeners of our sponsor, John Catt Educational. So this show, Teachers Talk Radio, is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, a leading publisher of books, directories, educational guides, and magazines specifically aimed at forward-thinking schools in the UK and beyond. Have you checked out their latest releases? Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. So, coming back to the challenges of being gifted then.
Oh goodness, how long do we have left, Natalie?
Half an hour.
Oh, okay. Obviously, we are all different, and I'll share a little personal, just anecdote here. But mom, 14 and 16-year-old boys, and obviously through their testing and their experience and being diagnosed as gifted, I was also diagnosed as adult as a gifted, and of course that helps you a little bit to really understand, why do I feel like that, why have I always felt different and odd and strange, and why I don't fit in, and why talking to my peers has never been very exciting, but I could sit with somebody 20 years older and have the most amazing conversation. So I think we need to understand that intellectually, socially, and emotionally, we developed differently. It doesn't match our chronological age. So that's something that is important to understand. So once I understood why my children behave the way they behave, and why we are such a neurodiverse family, we understood each other really well. And I think for our listeners, I'm a great fan of Kazimierz Dabrowski. Of course, probably everybody has heard about Maslow and his hierarchy of needs, or even Piechowski. I think that Dabrowski, back in the 60s, he found out a kind of relationship between gifted students and overexcitabilities. What do I mean by that? Gifted individuals, they have that innate tendency to respond in a very much intensified manner to all sorts of stimuli, or stimuli even. So he's just given us, he's classified these excitabilities in 5. So he talks about emotional, psychomotor, intellectual, sensual, sensory, and imaginational overexcitabilities. And I think it's important to understand, because especially in the classroom or with your children, family dynamics, there is an impact. And if we understand how we are wired, then it's going to help us Number one, to avoid triggers, and secondly, to understand situations, and to not judge and not to label incorrectly. For example, emotional overexcitability is that intense connection, feelings, fears of death, embarrassment, the feeling of fairness, of injustice. I cannot help it. I am not being sensitive, I'm not being dramatic. I truly feel deep inside that uh, feeling of injustice greatly. And somebody may say, well, you're taking it too much at heart. Yeah, but I'm not doing it purposely. That's how I feel. So it's my intensity and it's my reality. And I still remember being called to the headmaster's office 30 years ago, and I can still feel the same way as I felt, because we're intense, and we go back to that particular day and we almost relive that situation. So again, if some of your students have overexcitability, well, actually, if they do, which one they have is almost like we all have one or two more predominant. On a psychomotor level, is that surplus of energy. So there is that hyperactivity. Are all gifted individuals with psychomotor overexcitability ADHD? No, they're not. But again, teachers see what the student, young people, especially in primary, where they need to move, where they're very active, where they're impulsive, nervous habits, maybe tics, nail biting, a lot of physical energy. So it's so easy to misdiagnose. And I think there is that very thin uh, uh, line or level between gifted and overlapping with other conditions that very often is misdiagnosed, really. An intellectual overexcitability would be those students that they have that uh, greatness about probing questions, analytical thinking, reflectiveness, problem solving, interest in abstraction. So it goes beyond them. It's almost like it's so intense they cannot help it, and that's at times can be difficult when they are working with peers, because they can come across as being rigid thinkers, but they are just intense because they truly feel that way. And I'm sure that all of us at school, well, actually, I did, because of it just feeling in that category. But on a sensory level, how many times have you worn, especially girls, those woolen tights? Remember in the olden days, they were
Oh
so
gosh,
itchy,
against those
and
chairs.
oh, they were so uncomfortable. Or the labels, or sitting next to light, or the noise, the smell near the
The
kitchen.
nylon A skirt, the
Oh,
A-line skirt with the nylon lining, which didn't go well with the tights.
exactly. So again, if you have a pupil in front of you who's always fidgety and pulling tights and moving and scratching and labels, that's showing that sensory overexcitability. And finally, the fifth category is imaginational. So is that creativity, that visualization of events, fantasy, poetic, artistic. So there will be just showing their giftedness alongside their overexcitabilities, and they shouldn't be penalized, but we should be aware of really that's who they are. We cannot judge, it's just how we are wired, and that's how intense we are. So it could be a good thing, it could be a less good thing at times, but we are intense people. And again, with my children, we could have three of us, we could see the same event and experience it in three completely different ways. And that's how amazing being neurodiverse is.
And the uniqueness of being human.
Oh my goodness, absolutely.
And it's actually really, really interesting what you say there about different reactions. I mean, obviously, I'm a drama specialist, so everything that I see and do is we're the desks are not there unless we're doing theory work and
Mm,
it's A level or GCSE. But for the most part, it's big open spaces. the students have more essentially freedom with regards to, talk through learning, group work, pair work. A lot of the time, staff within different departments in the various different settings that I've worked in, group work and pair work is a luxury of time when there's so much curriculum and assessment
Absolutely.
and exam work to get through. Whereas for me, it's sacrosanct. It's what my subject is about, is about working with others or communicating with others or to your audience. And that whole thing about emotion memory, about emotional recall, about this reality, this intensity. And you see it's the psychology of children. The minute you split them into a group, they naturally fall into, there's a leader, that person's railroading, and you have wade in and facilitate and remind them about the different rules within working in a group, about being collaborative, about listening to each other, about taking on board others' suggestions, even though you may not think they're very good or you agree with them. You have to try it out. And it is fascinating to think about this, in other classroom settings. Really, really, really interesting.
Yeah,
And
I
that
just
leads,
think, as you
yeah.
mentioned, obviously they're working collaboratively at it could be primary school, secondary school, but eventually they're going to enter the workplace, the work environment, and they need those soft skills. They need those abilities. In order to be able to work with other people and understand that they have different point of view, so they are developing that analytical and critical thinking rather than my way or the highway kind of thing, because we have stronger or weaker personalities, and again, as you mentioned, automatically you know who's going to be the leader, who's going to be the follower, and self-sacrificing, and of course self-regulation. That's another big thing when it comes to gifted students.
And that kind of leads neatly onto perfectionism, and whether gifted students can sometimes come across as being quite sort of highly strung, like you said, the
Mm,
sort of my way or the highway.
mm.
Sometimes there's an incredible amount of perfectionist behavior, and where that comes from.
Well, of course, I'm always right, Natalie.
Well, of course, I'll let you
I,
have that.
yes. And of course, I think when you are, I think when our students, they feel very strong and very passionate about their niche. They know a lot, even sometimes more than teachers.
Absolutely.
And they are just, it's not necessarily obsessed, but they are engrossed in that conversation. So, of course, when you're so passionate about it, you are right because you've researched it and you know a lot about it, which can be difficult. I think then is when the social interaction perfectionism comes, which leads us to different challenges and mental health. I think, especially teenage girls, they do go through I mean, obviously, gifted teenage girls. Not that all teenage girls, I'm sure all teenage girls go through difficult times during their teenage years, but especially gifted girls, they is what they are called like chameleons. They adapt to their environment, and they often play down their talents to feel accepted. They don't want, we know the dynamics between girls is slightly different to boys, and for them, in order to be accepted, to fit in, there is a lot of peer pressure, which it's just something like to really bear in mind when it comes to their mental health. And again, recently I was talking to someone about, but what is it, mental health? We talk about mental health, but what is it actually? Oh, mental health issues, but what is it? It's just like that abstract term, and it's like,
Yeah, that
and I was
umbrella.
saying, yeah, exactly. I was saying, well, for me, having a good mental health is to be able to manage situations that come on a day-to-day basis, and to be able to analyze, to be able to recognize, and uh, to manage really in a healthy way. So when we get quite depressed or tormented or anxious, and we get a little bit clouded. So that's how we see more and more mental health issues with our pupils. And I just think, as you mentioned, with perfectionists, that high level of anxiety and frustration because they want to do it perfectly. And at times, I mean, obviously, I don't do art, but I can imagine how hard it can be when. Well, actually, I don't do art, but I have a perfectionist son who does art. So that was going through his GCSEs, Natalie. That was an absolute nightmare, to the point that I said, look, let's stick a rock in front of this corner. We don't need to see these things, you know. It's okay, it doesn't need to be perfect, but to the point that he would do it again. It doesn't look right. It's not perfect, because they want to do the best they can, and if there is a little thing, it's not good enough. So I think we need to learn to teach them, to help them to understand how their frustration rises, increases, and how the little warning signs almost. It's first affecting their body. That's why I speak a lot about to my students. It's like, before you get angry and that volcano erupts, what are the little signs, you know? Are you tightening your fists? Are you getting hot, sweaty? Is your body showing little signs of how things are changing? So if we begin to help them and understand how to regulate those emotions, we prevent that big escalation and that big volcano. So definitely.
Really, yeah, really interesting that you say that, because it's that whole, I guess they've kind of got this ingrained sort of like fail to prepare, prepare to fail, you know, that saying, and and wanting to be the best, wanting to know where their place is within that group, or get that 100% for that test, and so and also sometimes sort of sidestepping around, maybe doing things that are outside their comfort zone that they know they can't do, because they want to have that element of success and that element of praise. Do gifted students therefore, to avoid, you know, do they struggle when they don't do well, when they get 98%, for example, rather than that 100%? You know, like where does that put them in terms of
Yeah.
their mental health?
Well, I think, again, we are all individuals, and we all have our strengths and weaknesses. We cannot say and generalize. This is probably the most heterogeneous group, because you actually have
Yeah.
gifted students who are very well regulated, who are happy, who've gone through schooling without having any issues. They've adapted, they're self-regulated, and they're actually very successful later on in life. Now, on the other hand, we can find pupils who have not been supported. We need to understand as well social economical background, support they get at home, ACEs. I mean, recently I've been looking a lot into ACEs as well, and the impact in adult life. And all this really needs to be taken into consideration. So yes, some pupils, they'll get 80% and they'll be okay with it. Some others will get 99% and you will feel their frustration. They will challenge me. Oh, well, miss, are you sure about this? Yes. Oh, but did you not say no? Is that an accent? Did you knock me 1 mark because an accent? Yes. Okay, so it's always like almost haggling, and he's like, no, take it. You are 99% on this test. It'll be okay. It's okay. So you almost need to reassure them that the world is not going to end, and especially with our DME students, because they need that support, because being SEND pupils. But then at the same time, we cannot, I don't think our duty as educators is to dumb tasks down. We are not meant to give them easy tasks. We are meant to give them a lot of context. So the more we support them, the more tools we provide, the more help they have to tackle the task. The task should still be cognitively demanding, but we need to support them in a way that we are not failing them. And I think that's the balance that we need to have, especially with the low achievers, especially with very gifted children who leave school at the age of 16 without any GCSEs. That it's not that they have failed, we have failed them, the system has failed them because they haven't been able to provide the right provision for them. So
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
important, and
Because,
obviously
you
that.
know, school and books and you know, it's not for everyone. Hence the fact, you know, in years gone by, there were different colleges, technical colleges, etc., where, you know, they could learn practical skills that were much better suited to their skill set and their abilities and
Mm.
talents.
But I just think, like, if you can picture Maslow's hierarchy of needs, he's talking
Hmm.
about physiological needs. That's the base of the pyramid, and then he goes to safety needs, then love and belonging. And I'm passionate about that level, belonging. We need to get them socially and academically included. So if we transfer that to an educational setting, those physiological basic needs, which could be just food and water, shelter. In an educational setting, we are providing with a timetable, with term dates, with classroom. Do they know where they're going? Are we providing those basic needs? Then we move on to the safety needs. Do they have the resources? Are we providing with mark schemes? Do they know how they're going to be graded, evaluated? What type of testing? Is it a one test at the end of the year and that's it, or are they going to be working? Some of our pupils, they might be quite confused trying to just maneuver through the day to day. And let's not forget, you have your EAL students as well, which at times, which barrier can mask that they are gifted. And it's
Absolutely.
something really important to consider, especially in recent years when we have more refugee or students under refugee status, international law. So again, I think once they understand where they're going, how they're going to be evaluated, the next step, they feel reassured. So the
Mm.
next step would be the social and academic inclusion. They belong, and I truly believe they need to belong. They need to have friends. They need to be part of something, because we feel, and I say we because I do as well. Some days I think, oh my goodness, it's like I've just landed from Mars. Is everybody talking to me? Are they understanding what I'm talking about? Because it's hard to find your little tribe, and it is very hard. And once they belong, once they're part of something, they are that self-esteem, that a motivation increases, which will reflect on their academic results, how we provide feedback, and eventually we want them to become independent learners. That self-actualization that Maslow is talking about is that independent learners. Which actually, I don't know, but this is news to me recently, that the pyramid has been upgraded, it's been revised, because of
Hmm.
course society has changed in the last 50 years. So now, beyond self-actualization, we have self-transcendence.
Oh,
So that's how, once we've achieved that independent learning, then we can help others. Then we are part of um, helping each other. I know probably we're running out of time, but I would like to say one more thing, Natalie.
yeah, no, that's great, because it's talking about the self-esteem and
Yes.
collaboration, and obviously there's, you know, ways in which we can help mental health, and I think
Mm.
that's where you're going.
Oh, I just think I talk too much, so do please to
No,
ask
it's
me to
wonderful.
stop.
I've been really no, I'm really
I
learning
hope
so
our
much. I
listeners
find
are
it
not
really
bored or they're not
interesting.
sleepy there. Well, it could
Oh,
be.
no, I want you to tell me about the, you know, the meditation and the gong
Oh,
bath
yes,
for
true. I
this
forgot about that.
last
Yeah, well,
mental health
yes,
push.
absolutely, absolutely. I do. I do run sound baths regularly, and I think in different schools. I've done it in primary schools, I've done it in secondary schools, I've done it in more inclusive schools, and I think this boy, I think he was about maybe 7 or 8. Um, he has ADHD, and he came to me after the session and said, "Miss, this is the most relaxed I've ever been." And I thought, that's
Oh,
wonderful. So
that is
basically, sound
wonderful.
baths, it's, as I say to the pupils, is a cheap way of going for a meditation. Now, when
It
somebody
is.
says meditation, especially the younger ones, oh, don't think about anything, welcome your thought and let go. And oh my goodness, I'm already stressed. I'm already thinking about what I should be cooking and shopping and everything else. So I think with sound baths, basically, they just listen to the different sounds, which are different instruments, that they're not the normal sounds that they would hear. So I play the crystal balls, Tibetan balls, chimes, all sort of shruti box, and of course they go into a very deep relaxation. The brain goes down to a theta brainwave, so they relax by listening to the different sounds, and often they fall asleep, but again they keep on coming for more. So I think it's wonderful how we can, no matter what we do, if we can help their mental health, no matter what it is, that's we are already helping them towards that self-regulation and resilience. So I think if we provide that inclusion, that differentiation, understanding them, because they are individuals, they are not a little label that fits all. Every label is different, and we praise them. Linda Silverman, wonderful lady, she says, she talks about equity, and she was talking about, well, she gave us this metaphor a while back, and she said equity is not about giving every child a shoe. It's about giving every child a shoe that fits them. So it's not about giving everybody something. We need to tailor to their needs, and I think that's how we should be doing it, really.
I think that's a wonderful way of summing it up. I love shoes. And there's so many, literature quotes about, characters, people, shoes, different, different unique experiences, and walking around in other people's skin, which is my favorite To Kill a
Mm,
Mockingbird quote. But yeah, I mean, really, really important that these gifted students have that way of self-regulation when they're hungry, that halt when they're hungry, angry, lonely, tired, frustrated, to find a way. And I know particularly, during the pandemic, how important it was. I did little meditations with some of my GCSE and A-level students, and they really appreciated that, and it's become part of my practice now, as a drama specialist. So I really do understand the importance of that, and for myself, to switch off from work and all the other pressures that we have as adults as well. So thank you so much for joining me this evening, Sylvia.
you're very
It's
welcome.
been really lovely to listen to you and all your experience, and I hope our listeners have been able to get something out of this. Do tune in to some of the other Teachers Talk radio shows. There's a really exciting program and lineup for the rest of the week. Obviously, you can listen to all of our shows after they've been published, and after they've gone live. I was listening yesterday to the Late Show with Christopher Voles that had gone out on Sunday. So if you're interested in what myself and Sylvia have been talking about, then please have a listen to this show. Christopher was discussing ways of challenging and supporting able students as well. That he was talking to the CEO of National Association for Able Children in Education, called NACE, Rob Lightfoot, and he was also speaking to Professor Andy P. Hull of the University of York, St John. and what they were talking about was also fascinating. So it's been a real week for me of learning more and more about this area and thinking about how I can use some of this information in my own practice. So thanks once again for listening to my show. It's been a delight to be here on Teachers Talk Radio. Thank you to the whole Teachers Talk Radio family for their help and support with my show this evening.